Vince Carter last night was certainly a part of the story as the NBA season has been suspended. As the Hawks hosted the Knicks, Hawks fans wanted Vince Carter to check in because if the NBA season does not ever return, this would have been his last game, and fans got their wish. He nailed a three on what might have been the final shot of his career, and he was emotional when it was over.
I'm one, like, I'm appreciative, but, you know, I do my time and just walk out the door is okay with me, you know, believe it or not, but it's cool. Believe it or not, it's cool. I just, game's been good.
Wow, what a moment and what a way for it to end if indeed it does. And it's a tough transition to do that, to saying we are delighted to have Rachel Nichols with us in our studio here, the host of The Jump on ESPN, of course, and leading our basketball coverage in so many different ways. And obviously this was not the way you and I have talked many times about you coming here.
Come on over.
Not the way we anticipated it having it, but we are thrilled to have you here, and we will talk at great length about all the things that are happening around us as we come to you live every morning from the Seaport District at Pier 17. We're brought to you by Chase. And here was the scene last night for those of you who are just waking up and perhaps do not know. The season was suspended by the NBA after these events in Oklahoma City. Chris Paul and the Thunder scheduled to host the Jazz at 8:10, so literally seconds before the game was to begin. You can see Chris Paul over at the Utah bench asking after Rudy Gobert, who was not at the arena after feeling ill. 4 minutes later, the announcement was made that the game was being postponed.
Yeah, the game tonight has been postponed. You are all safe. And take your time in leaving the arena tonight and do so in an orderly fashion. Thank you for coming out tonight. We are all safe.
Despite what sounds like an understandably stunned reaction there from the fans, it was orderly as everybody departed. It was later revealed that Rudy Gobert had tested positive for coronavirus. You see the court was roped off. You see workers spraying down the seats. The Jazz players did not leave the arena until after 2 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. Those are their buses finally departing. And the NBA subsequently announced that after a player on the Jazz preliminarily tested positive for COVID-19 and the test result was reported shortly prior to the tip-off of that game, at that time, tonight's game was canceled. Part of the statement, the affected player was not in the arena. And here's the important part of the announcement. The NBA is suspending gameplay following the conclusion of tonight's schedule of games until further notice. The NBA will use this hiatus to determine next steps for moving forward in regard to the coronavirus pandemic.
Rachel, you're so connected with the NBA and so involved in all of this. Just when you saw this happen and as it was all unfolding, what's your reaction?
I'm like everybody else. What do? You go to your phone and your phone starts blowing up, right? Texts from everywhere, people asking questions. I think Brian and I have both had the experience where you have players and team officials asking us, what's going on? What do I do? That sort of thing, because they sort of start to see the media as a central hub of information. Good reminder why the media is important in times of crisis. And look, the players I talked to, Damian Lillard was sitting on his couch, right? Again, like the rest of us, and then suddenly becomes like everyone else, not having enough information, feeling scared, worried about his young son and what he may have exposed his son to. So I think that's sort of the general reaction of the players I've talked to. Kyle Lowry, who plays for the Raptors, that they just got off of a road trip, and he said, thank God I haven't been really around my kids, right? And now they're being asked to self-quarantine and start to get tested and all of that. So I think for a lot of players, they're very glad and relieved to have the season suspended because they understand the ripple effect. They know how many guys that they're around, right? You know, Jay, from being in that locker room, and the fact that it's then everyone that the Jazz have played, and then it becomes everyone they have played. And they're doing that math right along with everyone else.
I just want to give some context about self-quarantine because my wife and I talk about it. So what happens if you need to self-quarantine? Because then the place that you're actually at, your home, could be infected as well. So then you have to spend time by yourself. And where are you going to put your family? You're going to put them in a hotel around other people that could potentially be affected, around other family members. It's a very scary time for all these players. And look, this is where leadership, and we talked about that in the first hour, Brian, leadership is so imperative during these times to keep everybody calm, under control, but there needs to be a scheme in place to help people understand what to do next.
Well, and we heard Royce Young reporting earlier in the show about the fact that the Utah Jazz right now, who are still in their hotel trying to figure out what to do, and they've got separate plans for separate hotels for quarantine, for positive and negative tests. He's going to continue to keep us updated there.
There's other Jazz players who are sick.
Yeah.
Emmanuel Mudiay was out with an illness last night. We don't have an update on that. And my expectation is that as other players get tested, if there are positive cases, we may not even find out about them. But obviously, there's going to be a lot of people concerned about it. And what I would just say, I think the NBA made the right call here. And what I would just say to everybody else is, we're in a historic moment. Be on the right side of history. Don't be late. Be early. If you're going to make a mistake, be early. The NBA, even though they could have taken the steps a day or two early, the fact that they were able to get the test done and they were able to stop that game from happening, even if it just infinitesimally helped the situation, it helped. Shutting down the season helped. They need other leagues and other organizations need to follow in their footsteps.
Okay, so we cannot tell you what is going to happen. We can tell you what has happened, and frequently that is instructive. So, Wendy, I'd like you to share, for those who've not heard, how exactly was this handled by the Chinese Basketball Association? Because I think that is an important blueprint. The circumstances aren't exactly the same,
sure.
But I think it is very much relevant here.
Right. When the virus started really getting going in China, the Chinese Basketball Association shut down. It happened to be during their Chinese New Year celebration, so the league was on their own all-star break, so to speak. And a lot of players were actually out of the country on vacation. I talked to one guy who was in Turkey on vacation. I talked to another player who's played in the NBA who was in Bali on vacation. And they basically shut down. And they have been shut down, keeping in communication with their team for the last 9 weeks. As the virus has run its course, as the government has taken action there, and fortunately has leveled off the virus to the point where life is beginning to return to normal in China, and the players are now being called back. The first calls to the Chinese players and coaches went out over the last couple of days. They want them to get back and make sure they're in quarantine and healthy if they're out of the country, and they intend to start in early April. I don't know if that's the way it'll be here, but what I can say is that it was a 9 to 10 week process. Maybe that's what'll happen. Maybe it'll be shorter, maybe it'll be longer, but at least we have seen that test case, that we can, A, know that it's not the end of the world, and B, know that the sports could come back just a little bit delayed.
Is that the sort of thing you're hearing, Rachel?
Yeah, and if you take a break, that is 6-8 weeks. And again, we don't know how long it might be, but that does give the NBA time to work out all the building commitments. I heard you say earlier this morning that they've asked teams to check schedules for their buildings through August. It is complicated. You and I talk to the schedule makers every year, and just how many dominoes they have to do, teams who share buildings with hockey teams, concerts, things like that. It does give them time to start to try to work that out. One of the other big questions, if they do a restart in addition to the buildings, is do you start and do the entire rest of the season? We know how NBA players feel that March is kind of useless anyway, right, guys? Or do you just go straight into the playoffs? You have 15 of the 16 teams who are essentially locked into their spots. 99% if they run the models that they'll end up where they end up. Just that 8th seed in the West, kind of up for grabs, although the other teams are 3.5 games behind Memphis. So I think that the NBA could say to teams, we're just going to start with the playoffs. And that at least would preserve not only the championship for the season, but also the revenue that comes with the playoffs, which is huge and is a consideration here, not obviously in whether they play or not, because they've already made the decision we're going to suspend for public health. But if there's a point where public health allows them to resume, that money will be a factor.
Let me propose this too. So if you do start the playoffs a little bit later, that goes a little bit deeper into the summer. Maybe that comes back to what the CEO of the Atlanta Hawks said, Coonan. Maybe you start the next season around December, and that becomes the new cycle of what the NBA season could potentially be.
Today is a rough day to have silver linings.
I understand.
It's hard to feel that. But there will be silver linings that come out of this. You know, if you're feeling really bad right now and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. Let me just say, what if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan? I mean, this now brings Kevin Durant. If I was Kevin Durant, because once I find out I'm healthy, once I find out my team's healthy, I'm starting to think, wait a minute, we're going to make the playoffs. I'm going to be able to play. And so we're not going to feel it today, but we're going to find positives that are going to come out of this in the coming days and weeks. Yeah. And that's what's going to sustain us.
In the interim, let's expand a moment here, if we can, on the thought that you had a minute ago about being ahead of this rather than behind it. The NCAA has decisions to make. For the moment, the NCAA tournament games, the men's and the women's, are scheduled to be played next week. They're scheduled to be played without fans. Spring training baseball games are going on. You talked to Buster Olney earlier. You will talk to Jeff Passan later this hour about what baseball's plans are. The Players' Championship, the golf tournament in Florida, is underway as we speak. They are playing and spectators are there. It'll be interesting to see if those decisions change.
But this is why this doesn't make sense to me, right? Because you just saw in a league a player test positive and all of the tumble of ramifications for that. Because think about it. Even if you were being much less cautious than the NBA is, and I commend them, by the way, for acting as quickly as they did last night. They could have waited even until this morning, and they didn't. But if you have a baseball player who tests positive, a college kid who tests positive, you have to domino out, take their entire team off the schedule for 2 weeks, right?
Well, and Jay, we brought this point up earlier.
This could happen to them?
There are conference tournaments that are happening right now. You would know this better than me, but these players are rooming together. They are around each other constantly as we speak.
Well, here's the thing. If you're an NBA player, an MLB player, an NHL player, you're playing for multi-billion-dollar franchises. They have access to the test.
Yes.
But if you're a college kid, not every college kid has access to get tested, so you don't even really know who could potentially be infected or who isn't infected. But you're going to allow them to play. You can't do that.
Their schools have canceled classes.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? I hope they're just getting the press release edited. I really honestly do.
I agree.
It's an interesting thought, and I'm told that we will have Mark Cuban coming up here, so he's going to join us shortly. And the decisions that have to get made here are really fascinating. And the thought that just entered my mind as we were talking about this, if you want to give everyone a pass on not being ahead of this, yesterday, Matt Barnes, sitting in that chair, told us that he was at Draymond Green's birthday party on Saturday, and this wasn't a topic of conversation, that no one was talking about it. So NBA players, multiple active NBA players, I don't know how many, Matt is still here, we'll ask him as he rejoins us, we're all together and not talking about this at all 4 days ago.
I'm going to say this too. I know this is going to be day to day, but we should start talking about the Olympics too, guys. I mean, the Olympics are in Tokyo, Japan. We're going to be sending our best of the best over there. I mean, I understand we have to see where we will be then.
They've been on lockdown. They've had their schools closed for a month already, and those schools are closed until April. So they have basically said we are getting way ahead of this because they know they're hosting the Olympics.
Okay, we will take a brief break. Again, we saw Mark Cuban stunned on the